First of all, thank you so much, everyone, for coming. This is a new experience to do an artist talk in the middle of an opening, and it's just wonderful to see so many faces, some Americans as well. Um, yes, so there's a lot behind this show, the way that I work and the individual paintings. Moving into talking about this show, The Dolmens, after Seoul, I came back and I really started looking at, there was this wonderful show in Paris of still life painting that played with trompe l'oeil and illusion. And I found when I was looking at a lot of these old paintings, whether it was Ingres or there's a few other great ones, um, that it became about the frame and how the frame receded into the picture plane
Mm.
that made it convincing. So this research with trompe l'oeil painting, it dovetailed with the interest in the diorama in this interesting way where I felt like I could begin to think about a shallow depth in landscape, that no longer was I concerned with these vast expanses like in my previous Soul show, but it became about the ways, the limits of these landscapes and the sides of the boxes. And so the dolmens came about because, well, I had never heard of the dolmens until my parents were like, "Oh, you're painting dolmens." And dolmens are from the Stone Age. They're some of the first structures that man made, and they existed all around the world. There's a large collection of them in Korea, but they also exist in Ireland and in France. And it's the first place where man retreated from the outside world and came inside into these very simple slab boxes. And so visiting this summer and seeing this space and realizing that half of the gallery is glass and that you have the exact same thing happen where you're looking into a kind of vitrine, where you're looking into a display case, I found this to be a very interesting parallel with the caves, with dolmens, with going underground.
Mm.
And so, yes, this show really, it's different than the last show in the sense that there's less color, there's much more of a underground primordial sensibility. There's a darker lighting in them. And I think that this idea of petrification, of stone and stasis also became really interesting in the context of virtual reality, which is unchanging and always the same. In terms of inspiration, there were a couple of paintings that just kept popping up in my brain over and over, and one of them was this Dürer observational painting, which is seen by some as being one of the first landscape paintings in Western art, and really, it's a strange still life of this decaying piece of grass, and it it I think sat with me so deeply because it has to do with this deep looking and this return to a thing that changes as he's sitting and making it. And so here are just a couple of quick slides of some of the paintings in the show. They're kind of the before and after. Um, that really it's through this process of telephone that these paintings become more and more fleshed out. The sketches are often very, very simple, very fundamental. And here's another example of this like long progression by which the drawing becomes a sort of sculpture, which is then transmuted into a photograph, which then ends up in painting the original image. And then, yes, I wanted to include this one also because we're in this room and it's fun, to have a practice where there's a lot of whimsy and a lot of play in the process. This little far image is basically an abstract ink watercolor that then turned into its own world through this process of just refining. And then the last things that I wanted to touch upon in the show are the drawings, because this is the first time that I've included things other than paintings in a show. And they are interesting. You know, they're not preliminary works, they actually came about at the end of all of the paintings. And I enjoyed very much that they didn't come from looking at actual plants or birds or rams, that it was more about looking at my impression of the bird, the plant, the ram. And the paintings, I think they most obviously speak to this bas relief aesthetic, as well as this idea of something lying underneath. You know, that if this is the show that is really about returning to the earth, going underground, the drawings also have this element of something that is under the surface, whether it's on the other side of a sheet or a vacuum seal. Um, these other little images, one is a death mask, one is a rubbing, and these were all things I was thinking about. So yeah, so these are all the slides I've prepared, but I would love to talk to all of you. I'd love to hear and answer any questions that you may have around the show. So one of the things that comes up is, when is it done? If there are so many versions and so many iterations, that to me, the end conversation needs to land in painting, because in this day and age where we have so many images, I think it's easy to forget that the first image we ever saw was painting. Whether it's, you know, cave paintings, paintings we now think of as being sort of about gesture or material, but originally they were about reproductions of reality. Well, there's a lot of things. I mean, there's the formal considerations of how to just make all of the puzzle pieces fit together in an interesting way. But then a lot of it is just allowing yourself to run free and almost create your own botanical garden. You know, a tree from the backyard of my home mixed with, you know, images of a painting from the Black Forest in Germany in the 1700s. And the beauty is that even though I can have all of these disparate sources, when they come together in one sculpture, they're believable. You know, that it creates a context in which it's completely natural that things from opposite sides of the world, from different times, can be. Yeah. I mean, they're collage from a lot of different things, and I've really enjoyed listening to what people see in them, because, you know, I have heard this feedback that say it resembles the various bonsai or things, but you know, it's also pretty pastiche, like, because they're sourced in collage. There's not necessarily one thing that I'm trying to pull from, but it's fascinating for me to see how uh, you know, principles around what is beautiful, I think, translate across cultures in this very surprising way. You know, images of ponds, sunsets, sunrises. um, yes, I don't know if that properly answers your question, but I didn't intentionally try and make a Japanese show, but I think it's kind of does and land in an interesting way. I find that really interesting, the violence, because I mean, I think we definitely treat our environment with a certain level of violence. I also think that, you know, one is indoctrinated with a history of painting that seeks to elicit radical emotions, you know, whether it's the Romantics or Hudson Valley painters, we're used to paintings that try and make us feel something. Um, so when it comes to like depicting people, I subscribe to the belief that you don't need to have a person in a image to have it be about people. And I think there is a way of looking at these landscapes that's about how man wants an environment to look, what we expect a utopia or a good place that's green to resemble. That's a good. It's funny because when I realized that plein air painting really only became a thing in the 1800s, that before then people would go out and they would do studies, but it wasn't about accuracy.
Yeah.
That gave me a lot of freedom. So though I do go to botanical gardens to maybe do studies of individuals, trees and things, I'm very interested in creating my own little world and not so much trying to reproduce the world as it exists. So that's a good question. No, I haven't painted I mean, I've studied and but never, in the context of these paintings. Well, those two examples are I think really pertinent because El Greco is all about this elongation and distortion, and I think that a lot of these environments there's that scale shift, which comes from virtual reality because virtual reality you can be big, be small, and then Goya is just a master of light. I mean those black and white etchings. So both of those scale shifts of lighting are things that I'm thinking about. Yeah. What is funny is that by using virtual reality versus just sculpting something with my hands, is you can create a level of detail that can intoxicate. It's sort of like you get sucked into this thing where you want to flesh out the sculptures to make them super, super real, but then that information falls away when you do the painting. So there's like a leap of faith because I don't necessarily know what's going to be important or what's going to work. And sculpture is the part of the process where I almost present too much. And then the painting becomes a process of editing back and figuring out, oh, that can be a very gestural stroke that I don't need to know that the light falls exactly on this leaf. Yes, if that answers your question. And until recently, I've been enjoying like the secrecy of having these worlds that are so built out. But um, yeah, there's something to be said about at least showing the process. You get to they get to come alive a little bit in their own way because I've been thinking about the paintings as portraits of places that have gone extinct, that these are places that you can't go to, and that if each painting has one model, once the painting is done, the model disappears. The model's, saved or deleted. Are there any other questions? Well, if not, thank you so much for coming. I know I raced through it a little bit, but it's wonderful to have so many people here, and I encourage you to go up to the paintings, look at them very closely, and then to look at them from the other side of the room, because hopefully they operate both ways. But thanks for coming.